Meditations on the Tarot, Letter 7, the Chariot, Part 2. Now, we had interrupted ourselves in Part 1 after exploring Jung's concept of individuation. Now the author moves on to the concept of inflation. Now, inflation is the principal risk that attends each person who seeks the experience of depth, the experience of what is occult, which lives and works behind the facade of phenomena of ordinary consciousness. Therefore, inflation constitutes the principal danger and trial for occultists, esotericists, magicians, Gnostics, and mystics. Monasteries and spiritual orders have always known this, thanks to the immense pillar of experience which they have accumulated over millennia in the domain of the profound life. This is why their whole spiritual practice is based on the cultivation of humility by such means as the practice of obedience, the examination of conscience, and the reciprocal brotherly help of members of the community. Thus, if Sabbatai Zevi, 1625 to 1676, had been a member of a spiritual order with a discipline similar to that of Christian spiritual orders and monasteries, his illumination would never have led to his revealing himself in 1648 to a group of disciples as the promised Messiah. Neither would he have had to become a Turk in order to save his life and continue his mission. God has made me an Ishmaelite Turk. He has commanded and I have obeyed. The 9th day after my second birth, he wrote to his followers in Smyrna. Because he would have been spared positive inflation, just as he would have been spared the negative inflation of which Samuel Gander, his disciple, gives the following description. Quote, "It is said of Sabbatai Zevi that for 15 years he has been bowed down by the following affliction. He is pursued by a sense of depression which leaves him no quiet moment and does not even permit him to read, without his being able to say what is the nature of this sadness which has come upon him." Gershom G. Scholem, Major Trends in Jewish Mysticism, page 290. The history of the illumined Kabbalist Sabbatai Zevi is only an extreme case of the general dangers and trials which all practicing esotericists have to face. Indeed, Hargrave Jennings expresses this danger and trial in a successful way concerning the Rosicrucians. Quote, "They speak of all mankind as infinitely beneath them. Their pride is beyond idea, although they are most humble and quiet in exterior. They glory in poverty, and declare that it is the state ordered for them, and this though they boast universal riches. They decline all human affections, or submit to them as advisable escapes only, appearance of loving obligations, which are assumed for convenient acceptance, or for passing in a world which is composed of them, or of their supposal. They mingle most gracefully in the society of women, with hearts wholly incapable of softness in this direction, while they criticize them with pity or contempt in their own minds as altogether another order of beings from men. They are most simple and deferential in their exterior, and yet the self-value which fills their hearts ceases its self-glorifying expansion only with the boundless skies. In comparison with the Hermetic adepts, monarchs are poor, and their greatest accumulations are contemptible. By the side of the sages, the most learned are mere dolts and blockheads. Thus, towards mankind they are negative, towards everything else positive, self-contained, self-illuminated, self-everything, but always prepared, nay enjoined, to do good, wherever possible or safe. To this immeasurable exaltation of themselves, what standard of measure or what appreciation can you apply? Ordinary estimates fail in the idea of it. Either the state of these occult philosophers is the height of sublimity, or it is the height of absurdity. Hargrave Jennings, The Rosicrucians, Their Rites and Mysteries, pages 30 to 31. Let us say absurd as well as sublime, because inflation is always simultaneously sublime and absurd. This is what Eliphas Levi says about it. Quote, "There is also a science which confers on man powers apparently superhuman. They are enumerated thus in a Hebrew manuscript of the 16th century. Aleph, he beholds God face to face without dying, and converses familiarly with the 7 genii who command the entire celestial army. Beth, he is above all griefs and all fears. Gimel, he reigns with all heaven and is served by all hell. Daleth, he rules his own health and life and can influence equally those of others. He, he can neither be surprised by misfortune nor overwhelmed by disasters, nor can he be conquered by his enemies. Vow, he knows the reason of the past, present, and future. Zain, he possesses the secret of the resurrection of the dead and the key of immortality. Eliphas Levi, Dogma et Rituel de la Haute Magique, page 10. Is it a matter here of a program or of actual experience? If it is experience, it is one of inflation pushed very far. If it is a program, he who takes its realization seriously cannot fail to fall prey to inflation, be it positive, a superiority complex, or negative, an inferiority complex. Whatever it may be, the experience or program of this Hebrew manuscript of the 16th century quoted by Eliphas Levi shows a remarkable similarity to the experience of John Custance, described by him in his book Wisdom, Madness and Folly, The Philosophy of a Lunatic. It is as follows, quote, I feel so close to God, so inspired by his spirit, that in a sense I am God. I see the future, plan the universe, save mankind. I am utterly and completely immortal. I am even male and female. The whole universe, animate and inanimate, past, present and future, is within me. All nature and life, all spirits, are cooperating and connected with me. All things are possible. I am in a sense identical with all spirits from God to Satan. I reconcile good and evil and create light, darkness, worlds, universes. John Custance, Wisdom, Madness and Folly, The Philosophy of a Lunatic, page 51. The state described by John Custance is characteristic of that of acute mania, and the author himself in no way denies it. But would he still look at it in this way, one can ask, if he knew that his experience is found described exactly in the Bradaranyaka Upanishad, which says, he who is found and awakened to the soul that has entered this conglomerate whole, he is the maker of everything, for he is the creator of all. The world is his, indeed, he is the world itself. The 13 Principal Upanishads, page 142. Can one say with certainty that this text, quoted from the Upanishads, is based on an entirely different experience to that of John Custance? 38 years ago, I knew a tranquil man of mature age who taught English at the YMCA in the capital of a Baltic country. Now he revealed to me one day that he had attained a spiritual state which manifests itself through the eternal gaze, and which is that of consciousness of the identity of self with the eternal reality of the world. The past, present and future, seen from the pedestal of eternity, where his consciousness had its abode, were an open book for him. He had no more problems, not because he had resolved them, but because he had attained the state of consciousness where they disappeared, having become of no importance. Because problems belong to the domain of motion in time and space, he who transcends this and arrives at the realm of eternity and infinity, where there is neither movement nor change, is free of problems. When he spoke to me of these things, his beautiful blue eyes rayed out sincerity and certainty. But this radiance gave way to a dark and angry look as soon as I raised the question of the value of the subjective feeling of eternity, when one is not aware of or one is unable objectively to do something more towards helping humanity, be it in spiritual or other progress, or in the alleviation of spiritual, psychic and bodily suffering. He did not forgive me this question, and he turned his back on me, which was my last impression of him in this world. He made his way to India, where soon after he died as victim of an epidemic. I recount this episode in my life only so that you may know, dear unknown friend, when and how the very serious problem of the forms of and the dangers of spiritual megalomania were awakened in me, and how I owe it to this objective experience that I began work on this problem, some of the outcomes of which I am in the process of showing. Spiritual megalomania is as old as the world. Its origin is found well beyond the terrestrial world, according to the millennial-old tradition concerning the fall of Lucifer. The prophet Ezekiel gives a most moving description of this. You were the signet of perfection. You were full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. You were covered with every kind of precious stone, sardonyx, topaz, and diamond, chrysolite, onyx, and jasper, sapphire, carbuncle, emerald, and gold, with which you were adorned and which were prepared for you on the day that you were created. You were a guardian cherubim with outspread wings. I placed you, and you were on the holy mountain of God. You walked in the midst of the stones of fire. Your heart was proud because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom for the sake of your splendor. I cast you to the ground. I exposed you before kings to feast their eyes on you. Ezekiel 28:12-17. Here is the higher, i.e. celestial origin of inflation, superiority complex, and megalomania. And since that which is below is as that which is above, it is repeated below in human earthly life from century to century and generation to generation. It is repeated above all in the lives of those human beings who are detached from the ordinary earthly setting and the state of consciousness belonging to it, and who transcend it, be it in the sense of height, in the sense of breadth, or lastly in the sense of depth. He who aspires to a plane higher than that of the terrestrial setting risks becoming haughty. He who seeks breadth beyond the normal circle of earthly duties and pleasures risks considering himself to be more and more important. He who is in search of the depth beneath the surface of the phenomena of terrestrial life runs the greatest risk, that of inflation, of which C.G. Jung speaks. The abstract metaphysician, who arranges worlds according to an order that he has chosen, can lose all interest for the particular and for the individual, in such a way that he comes to consider human beings to be almost as insignificant as insects. He regards them only from above. Seen from his metaphysical height, they lose all proportion, and become for him small or almost insignificant, whilst he, the metaphysician, is great, since he participates in great metaphysical things, which clothe him in grandeur. The reformer who wants to correct or save humanity easily falls victim to the temptation of considering himself as the active centre of the passive circle of humanity. He feels himself as the bearer of a mission of universal significance. Therefore he feels himself to be more and more important. The practicing occultist, esotericist, or hermeticist, if he is not practicing, he is only a metaphysician or reformer. Experiences the higher forces which work beyond his consciousness and which make their entrance there. At what price? Either at the price of worshipping on his knees, or otherwise at the price of the identification of self with these higher forces, which results in megalomania. One speaks often of the dangers of occultism. Black magic is usually the supreme danger against which the beginner is put on guard by the masters. Others, above all those who know more or less about medicine, see it as disorders of the nervous system. But experience during 43 years of practical occultism, or esotericism, has taught me that the danger of occultism is neither black magic nor nervous disorder. At least, these dangers are met no more often amongst occultists than amongst politicians, artists, psychologists, believers, and agnostics. I am not able to cite by name any black magician amongst the occultists that I know, whereas it would not be too difficult to name some politicians who, for example, have nothing to do with occultism, and who would even be hostile to it, but whose influence and impact agree very well with the classical concept of that of the black magician. Indeed, is it difficult to name politicians who have exercised a deadly, suggestive influence on the popular masses, blinding them and inciting them to acts of cruelty, injustice and violence, of which each individual, taken separately, would be incapable, and who, through their semi-magical influence, have deprived individuals of their freedom and rendered them possessed? And is not this action to deprive men of their moral freedom and to render them possessed the aim and very essence of black magic? No, dear unknown friend, occultists, including those amongst them who practice ceremonial magic, are neither masters nor disciples of black magic. Truth to tell, they are amongst those who have least of all in common with it. It is true that they, above all the adepts of ceremonial magic, often fall prey to illusions and mislead themselves and others. But is this black magic? Besides, where can one find a class of human beings who never make mistakes? Even Dr. Faust, who made a pact with the devil and this concerns all pact makers of this kind, ancient and modern, was only the naive victim of a prank on the part of Mephistopheles, who is a rogue well known to all those who have knowledge of the occult world, because how can you sell something which in no way belongs to you? It is his soul which would have been able to sell Dr. Faust, but never would Dr. Faust be able to give away his soul, however solemn his pact was, and no matter whether he wrote and signed with blood or with ordinary ink. It is Mephistopheles' way of giving a lesson to those who want to be supermen. He brings to light the puerility of their pretensions. And whilst wholly deploring the naivety of poor Dr. Faust, one is led to consider the method of roguishness of Mephistopheles as, in the last analysis, salutary. Because what Mephistopheles does, and other examples of this method of a more recent date could be cited, is to show the ridiculousness and absurdity of the aspirations and pretensions of so-called supermen. Of all spirits who deny, the rogue is the least burden to me, says God concerning Mephistopheles in Goethe's Faust, Prologue in Heaven, Faust, Part 1. Let us therefore not condemn the rogue of the spiritual world, and above all let us not be afraid of him. Nor let us condemn Dr. Faust, our brother, by accusing him of black magic. It is rather childish credulity of which he can be accused, if he must be accused. In any case, he was 100 times more innocent with respect to mankind than our contemporaries who have invented the nuclear bomb, as good citizens and scientists. No, neither black magic nor nervous disorders constitute the special dangers of occultism. Its principal danger, of which, however, it has no monopoly, is designated by the three terms: superiority complex, inflation, megalomania. In fact, an occultist who is not a beginner, who has not attained this moral illness, or who has not at some time in the past undergone it, is rare. The tendency to megalomania shows up all over the place amongst occultists. Decades of personal relationships, as well as reading occult literature, have taught me this. There are many levels of this moral defect. It manifests at first as self-assurance and a certain informality with which one speaks of higher and sacred things. Then it expresses itself as knowing better and knowing all, i.e. as the attitude of a master towards everyone. Lastly, it manifests as implicit or even explicit infallibility. I do not want to cite passages from occult literature, nor to name names, nor to mention biographical facts concerning known occultists, in order to prove or illustrate this diagnosis. It would not be difficult for you, dear unknown friend, to find them yourself in abundance. What my intention is here is to refute the false accusations concerning occultism on the one hand, and on the other hand to show up the real danger that occultism presents, so that one is put on guard against it. But what should one do against this danger in order to guard one's moral well-being? The ancient saying, ora et labora, work and pray, constitutes the only answer that I have been able to find. Worship and work constitute the only curative as well as prophylactic remedy that I know against megalomaniacal illusions. It is necessary to worship what is above us, and it is necessary to participate in human effort in the domain of objective facts in order to be able to hold in check the illusions concerning what one is and what one is capable of. For whoever is aware of raising his prayer and meditation to the level of pure worship will always be conscious of the distance which separates and at the same time unites the worshipper and the worshipped. Therefore he will not be tempted to worship himself, which is in the last analysis the cause of megalomania. He will always have in sight the difference between himself and the worshipped. He will not confuse what he is with what the worshipped being is. On the other hand, he who works, i.e. he who takes part in human effort with a view to objective and verifiable results, will not easily fall prey to illusion with respect to what he is capable of. Thus, for example, a practicing doctor inclined to overestimate his power of healing will soon learn to know the real limits of his ability through experience of his failures. Jacob Boehme was a shoemaker and was illumined. When he had had the experience of illumination, the door became opened to me, so that in a quarter of an hour I observed and knew more than if I had attended a university for many years, he wrote in a letter to the tax collector Linda, where he recognized the being of beings, the firmament and the abyss, same letter. He in no way concluded from it that he, insofar as he was a shoemaker, could thenceforth do more than his colleagues in the trade, or that he himself could do more than before his illumination. On the other hand, through his illumination he learned to know the greatness of God and the world, of which I was highly astounded, without knowing how it happened to me, and whereupon my heart turned to praise of God, same letter, and this filled him with worship. Therefore it was work and the worship of God which protected the moral well-being of Jacob Boehme. And I allow myself to add here that my experience in the domain of esotericism has taught me that what was salutary in Boehme's case is also so, without exception, regarding all those who aspire to supersensible experiences. Worship and work, ora et labora, therefore constitute the conditio sine qua non for practical esotericism in order to hold in check the tendency towards megalomania. This is in order to hold it in check, yet in order to obtain immunity from this moral illness, more than this is necessary. One has to have the real experience of concretely meeting a being higher than oneself. I mean by concretely meeting neither the feeling of higher self, nor the more or less vague feeling of the presence of a higher entity, nor even the experience of a flood of inspiration which fills one with life and light. No, what I mean by concretely meeting is nothing other than a true and really concrete meeting, i.e. face-to-face. It can be spiritual, face-to-face in vision, or more physically concrete. Thus, Saint Teresa of Avila, in order to cite only one of many known examples, met the Master, conversed with him, asked and received from him advice and instruction on an objective spiritual plane. Yes, spirituality is not exclusively subjective, it can also be objective. And certainly Papou and his group of occultist friends met Monsieur Philippe of Lyon on the physical plane. Here are two examples of the concrete meeting that I mean. Now, he who has had the experience of a concrete meeting with a higher being, a saint or righteous individual, an angel or another hierarchical being, the Virgin Mary, the Master, becomes through this very fact immune with respect to the tendency towards megalomania. The experience of having been face to face with a great one necessarily comprises complete healing and immunity from any tendency towards megalomania. No human being who has seen and heard will be able to make an idol of himself. More than this, the true and ultimate criterion for the reality of these so-called visionary experiences, i.e. with respect to their authenticity or falsity, is given in the moral effect of these experiences, notably whether they make the recipient more humble or more pretentious. The experience of her meetings with the Master made Saint Teresa more and more humble. The experience on the terrestrial plane of the meeting with Monsieur Philippe of Lyon also made Papou and his occultist friends more humble. Now, these two experiences, quite different though they are with respect to subject and object, were authentic. Neither Papou was thereby mistaken about the spiritual greatness of he who he recognized as his spiritual master, nor was Saint Teresa any less mistaken about the reality of the Master whom she saw and heard speak. Dear unknown friend, read the Bible and you will find there a great number of examples of this law, which may be expressed as follows. Authentic experience of the divine makes one humble. He who is not humble has not had authentic experience of the divine. Take the apostles who saw and heard the Master, and the prophets who saw and heard the God of Israel. You will not find amongst them any trace of tendencies towards pride, such as you can certainly find amongst many Gnostic teachers who, consequently, had not seen and heard. But if it is true that it is necessary to have seen and heard in order to thoroughly learn the lesson of humility, what is there to say about people who are naturally humble and who have not seen and heard? Without prejudice to other good and valuable answers, the answer which seems right to me is that all those who are humble have certainly seen and heard, no matter where or when, and no matter whether they remember or not. Humility can be the result of the real, i.e. non-intellectual memory of the soul of the spiritual experience prior to birth, or it can be due to memory of nocturnal experience undergone during sleep, and which remains in the domain of the unconscious. Or, lastly, it can be the effect of experience that is present consciously or unconsciously but is acknowledged by oneself or others. For humility, like charity, is not a natural quality of human nature. Its origins can in no way be found in the domain of natural evolution, since it is not possible to conceive of it as the fruit of the struggle for existence, i.e. natural selection, and the survival of the fittest at the expense of the weak. Because the school of the struggle for existence does not produce humble people, it produces only strugglers and fighters of every kind. Humility is therefore a quality which must be due to the action of grace, i.e. it must be a gift from above. Now, the concrete meetings face to face, of which it is a question here, are always, without exception, events due to grace, being meetings where a higher being voluntarily draws near to a lower being. The meeting which made Saul, the Pharisee, into Paul, the Apostle, was not due to his efforts. It was an act of the one whom he met. It is the same with all meetings face to face with higher beings. Our part is only to seek, to knock, and to pray, but the decisive act comes from above. Let us now return to the arcanum, the Chariot, whose traditional meaning is victory, triumph, success. Quote, this meaning is derived naturally from the bearing of the personage, the charioteer, and presents no difficulty. J. Maxwell, Le Tarot, page 87. Now, there is all the same a difficulty that it presents, namely that of answering the question, does this card signify a warning or an ideal, or rather both at once? I am inclined to see in all the arcana of the tarot simultaneously both warnings and aims to be attained. At least, this is what I have learned through 40 years of study and meditation on the tarot. Thus, the magician is a warning against the intellectual jugglery of the metaphysician, heedless of experience, and against charlatancy of every kind. And at the same time it teaches concentration without effort, and the use of the method of analogy. The High Priestess warns us of the dangers of Gnosticism in teaching the discipline of true gnosis. The Empress evokes the dangers of mediumship and magic in revealing to us the mysteries of sacred magic. The Emperor warns us of the will to power and teaches us the power of the cross. The Pope confronts us with the humanistic cult of personality and the magical pentagram in which this culminates, and opposes to this holy poverty, obedience to the divine, and the magic of the 5 wounds. The Lover warns us of the 3 temptations and teaches us the 3 sacred vows. The Chariot, lastly, warns us of the danger of megalomania and teaches us the real triumph achieved by the self. The real triumph achieved by the self. This means to say the successful outcome of the process of individuation, according to C.G. Jung, or the successful outcome of the work of true liberation, which is the fruit of catharsis, or purification, and which precedes photismos, or illumination, and which is followed by henosis, or union, according to the Occidental initiation tradition. The triumpher on the Chariot can therefore signify either a sick person suffering from megalomania, or a man who has passed through catharsis or purification, the first of the 3 stages on the way of initiation. The thesis that I am advancing here is this, that just as with all the other cards of the arcana of the tarot, the card of the 7th arcanum also expresses a double meaning. The personage on this card signifies at one and the same time the triumpher and the triumpher, the megalomaniac and the integrated man, master of himself. The integrated man, master of himself, conqueror in all trials. Who is he? It is he who holds in check the 4 temptations, i.e. the 3 temptations in the wilderness described in the Gospels, as well as the temptation which synthesizes them, the temptation of pride, the center of the triangle of temptations, and who is, therefore, master of the 4 elements which compose the vehicle of his being, fire, air, water, and earth. Master of the 4 elements, that is to say, creative being in clear, fluid, and precise thought, creativity, clarity, fluidity, and precision being the manifestations of the 4 elements in the domain of thought. It means to say, moreover, that he has a warm, large, tender, and faithful heart. Warmth, magnanimity, sensitivity, and faithfulness being the manifestations of the 4 elements in the domain of feeling. There is, lastly, to add that he has ardor, man of desire, fullness, flexibility, and stability in his will. where the four elements manifest themselves as intensity, scope, adaptability, and firmness. To summarize, one can say that a master of the four elements is a man of initiative, who is serene, mobile, and firm. He represents the four natural virtues of Catholic theology: prudence, strength, temperance, and justice, or rather Plato's four cardinal virtues: wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice. Or yet again the four qualities of Sankaracharya: viveka, or discernment, vairagya, serenity, the six jewels of just conduct, and the desire for deliverance. Whatever the formulation may be of the four virtues in question, it is always a matter of the four elements or projections of the sacred name YHVH, the Tetragrammaton, in human nature. The four columns supporting the canopy on the chariot drawn by two horses in the card of the seventh arcanum therefore signify the four elements taken in a vertical sense, i.e. in their analogous meaning through the three worlds: the spiritual world, the soul world, and the physical world. And what is signified by the canopy itself that the four columns support? The function of a canopy, taken as a material object, is to protect the person who is found beneath it. It therefore serves as a roof. Taken in its spiritual sense, at which one arrives by way of analogy, the canopy above the man wearing a yellow royal crown expresses two contrary things: that the crowned man is a megalomaniac in the condition of splendid isolation, separated from heaven by the canopy, or else that the crowned man is an initiate in the mystery of spiritual well-being, and that he does not identify himself with heaven, being conscious of the difference which exists between himself and that which is above him. In other words, the canopy indicates the facts and truths underlying humility as well as megalomania. Humility, being the law of spiritual health, implies consciousness of the difference and the distance between the centre of human consciousness and the centre of divine consciousness. He has a skin, or a canopy if you wish, in his consciousness, just as the human body has a skin, which separates the human from the divine, at the same time uniting them. This spiritual skin protects the spiritual well-being of man by not allowing him to identify himself ontologically with God, or to say, I am God, i.e. Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahma, but at the same time allowing him the relationship of breathing, coming together and separating, which is never alienation, which together constitute the life of love. The life of love consists of coming together and separating always with the consciousness present of non-identity. This is analogous to the process of breathing, which consists of inhalation and exhalation. Is this not found expressed in an unparalleled way in the extract from Psalm 43, which is the sixth phrase in the Mass? O send out thy light and thy truth, let them lead me, let them bring me to thy holy hill and to thy tabernacles. Psalm 43:3. Yes, the light of your presence drawing near, and the truth that I receive in me through reflection, or separating, this leads us towards the tabernacle. Tabernacles. Are these not tents, baldachins, canopies, under which man is united in love with the divine, without identifying himself with it or being absorbed by it? Aren't these tabernacles made of the skin of humility, which alone protects us against the danger of killing love through ontological identification, i.e. the identification of the human being with divine being? For example, this soul is God in the Mandukya Upanishad 2, or consciousness is God from the Aitareya Upanishad 5.3, and therefore protects us from the danger of spiritual megalomania, i.e. from arrogating to ourselves the very being of God instead of his image. There are three forms of mystical experience: the experience of union with nature, that of union with the transcendental human self, and that of union with God. The first kind of experience is that of the obliteration of the differentiation between the individual's psychic life and surrounding nature. It is this which Lévi-Breuil calls mystical participation, which notion he coined whilst studying the psychology of primitive peoples. This notion designates the state of consciousness where the separation between the conscious subject and the object of the outside world disappears, and where subject and object become one. This kind of experience underlies not only shamanism and the totemism of the primitives, but also the so-called mythogenous consciousness, which is the source of natural myths, as well as the ardent desire of poets and philosophers for union with nature, e.g. Empedocles threw himself into the crater of the volcano on Mount Etna in order to unite himself with the elements of nature. The effect of peyote, mescaline, hashish, alcohol, etc. can sometimes, but not always, and not with everyone, produce states of consciousness analogous to that of mystical participation. The characteristic trait of this form of experience is intoxication, i.e. the temporary fusion of oneself with forces exterior to one's self-consciousness. The Dionysian orgies of antiquity were based on the experience of sacred intoxication, due to the obliteration of the differentiation between self and non-self. The second form of mystical experience is that of the transcendental self. It consists in separating the ordinary empirical self from the higher self, which is above all motion and all that which belongs to the domain of space and time. The higher self is therefore experienced as immortal and free. If nature mysticism is characterized by intoxication, that of the self, in contrast, has the characteristic trait of progressively coming to one's senses, with the aim of complete sobriety. A philosophy based on the mystical experience of the self, which represents it in the purest way and is least distorted by the addition of hazardous intellectual speculations, is that of the Indian school of Sankhya. There the individual Purusha is experienced in its separation from Prakriti, i.e. all movement, space and time, as immortal and free. Although the same experience is found at the basis of the Vedanta philosophy, its followers are not satisfied with the immediate experience which teaches nothing more and nothing less than the true self of man is immortal and free, but they add the postulate that the higher self is God. Quote, "This soul is God," Mandukya Upanishad 2. The Sankhya philosophy, in contrast, remains within the limits of the experience of the higher self as such, and in no way denies the plurality of Purushas, i.e. the plurality of immortal and free higher egos, nor does it raise the individual Purusha to the dignity of the Absolute, which has resulted in it being considered an atheistic philosophy. It is so if one considers by atheist the frank confession, "I have not had experience of anything higher than the immortal and free ego. Abiding by the experience, what can I say in good faith?" Sankhya is not a religion and therefore does not merit being classed as atheistic, any more than, for example, the modern psychological school of Jung does. On the other hand, can it be considered as proof of belief in God to attribute to the higher self of man the dignity of the Absolute? The third sort of mystical experience, and the term mystical used here comprises mystical experience proper and Gnostic experience as united, is that of the living God, the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob in the Judeo-Christian tradition, the God of St. Augustine, St. Francis, St. Teresa and St. John of the Cross in the Christian tradition, the God of the Bhagavad Gita, Ramanuja, Madhva and Katanya in the Hindu tradition. Here it is a matter of union with God in love, which implies a substantial duality being essentially at one. This experience has as its principal characteristic trait the synthesis of the intoxication of nature mysticism and the sobriety of mysticism of the higher self. The term coined by tradition to express the state where ardent enthusiasm and profound peace manifest themselves simultaneously is that of beatitude or beatic vision. Beatic vision implies the duality of the seer and the seen on the one hand, and their union or intrinsic oneness in love on the other hand. This is why this term expresses in a wonderfully clear and precise way the essence of theistic mystical experience, the meeting of the soul with God face to face in love. And this experience is all the more elevated the more complete the differentiation is, and the more perfect the union is. For this reason, the Holy Kabbalah puts at the center of spiritual experience that of the holy face, Arak Anfin, of the Ancient of Days, and this is also why it teaches that the supreme experience of the human being, as well as the highest form of death for a mortal, is attained when God embraces the human soul. This is what the Sefer Yetzirah says. And after that our father Abraham had perceived and understood, and had taken down and engraved all these things, the Lord Most High, Adon Hakol, revealed himself and called him his beloved, and made a covenant with him and his seed. Sefer Yetzirah, pages 26 to 27. And St. John of the Cross spoke of his experiences of the divine presence in the tabernacles of love only in the language of love. The three forms of mystical experience have their hygienic laws, or their tabernacles or skins. They fall under the law of temperance or measure. Otherwise, the rage of acute mania, megalomania, and complete alienation from the world menace respectively their adepts. The breastplate, the canopy, and the crown are the three symbols for the salutary measures pertaining to the domains of experience of nature mysticism, human mysticism, and divine mysticism. Now, the triumpher of the seventh arcanum wears a breastplate, stands under a canopy, and is crowned. This is why he does not lose himself in nature, why he does not lose God in the experience of his higher self, and why he does not lose the world in experiencing the love of God. He holds in check the dangers of rage, megalomania, and exaltation. He is sane. The triumpher of the seventh arcanum is the true adept of Hermeticism, i.e. an adept of mysticism, gnosis, and magic, divine, human, and natural. He is not running, he stands upright. He is not seated deep in meditation. He holds a scepter which serves him to bridle the two horses, one blue and one red, which draw his chariot. He is not absent, plunged into exalted ecstasy. He is on his way, and he goes forward, standing upright all the while in his vehicle. The two horses, the one blue and the other red, have relieved him of the effort of walking. The instinctive forces of yes and no, attraction and repulsion, arterial blood and venous blood, trust and mistrust, faith and doubt, life and death, and lastly, right and left, symbolized by the pillars of Jachin and Boaz, have become motive forces in him, obedient to his scepter. They serve him voluntarily, as he is their true master. He trusts them and they trust him. This is mastership according to Hermeticism. For in Hermeticism, mastership does not signify the subjugation of the lower by the higher, but rather the alliance of superconsciousness, consciousness, and instinctive or subconsciousness. This is the Hermetic ideal of peace in the microcosm, the prototype of peace within a humanity divided into races, nations, classes, and beliefs. This peace is equilibrium or justice, where each particular force playing its part in the life of the microcosm is assigned its rightful place in the life of the entire psychic and physical organism. Equilibrium or justice is the subject of the following arcanum, the eighth arcanum, justice, which will be the theme of the next letter. Summarizing the practical teaching, for it is always the practical aspect which occupies us in the first place, of the seventh arcanum of the tarot, one can say that the triumpher is a convalescent, i.e. that the triumpher has triumphed over sickness or imbalance, spiritual, psychic, and physical, which means to say that he is at the same time righteous, or the one who has triumphed over the four temptations by remaining faithful to the three sacred vows, as well as to their root and synthesis, humility. In turn, this means to say that he is a liberated man or master. He is free of astrological planetary influences, rediscovered in our time by C.G. Jung in the guise of the collective unconscious, with its 7 principal psychic forces or archetypes. He is master of the archetypes, astrological planetary influences, or archontes of the ancient Gnostics, i.e. the shadow, the persona, the animus, the anima, the wise old man or father, the mother, and even the self, above which is even the self of selves or God. In other words, he holds in check the influences, insofar as they are baleful, of the moon, Mercury, Mars, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn, and even the sun, above which he knows there exists the Son of Suns or God. He is not without the planets, archetypes or archontes, just as he is not without earth, water, air, and fire, for these are what comprise that which is called the astral body or psychic body in occultism. The psychic body is a body insofar as it is composed of unconscious, collective, or planetary psychic forces. It is the astrological planets, or Jung's archetypes, which form the stuff of the psychic or astral body. The triumpher of the seventh arcanum is therefore the master of the astral body. Master of the astral body. This means to say master of the seven forces which it comprises, holding them in equilibrium. What is the eighth force which puts the seven forces of the astral body in equilibrium? It is the eighth arcanum of the tarot, justice, which gives the answer to this question.